Monica Reed was dragged into court accused of obstructing justice by the very cop who pushed her to the ground in front of a silent judge and a watching crowd. She didn't fight back with anger. She stayed quiet for a reason. What no one in that courtroom knew was that Monica wasn't just any defendant, she was the police chief's wife, and she had come with a mission. What happens when the system tries to humiliate the wrong woman? If this story grips you already, hit like, share it, and stay with us because what comes next will leave you stunned. They brought her in quietly, but no one missed the clank of the handcuffs. Monica Reed walked into the courtroom with the kind of calm that made people uneasy, not because she looked dangerous, but because she didn't look afraid. A black woman in her 40s, dressed plainly, head held steady. The kind of face people too often look past, until it stares back at them without blinking. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't scan the room for sympathy. She didn't even acknowledge the man who led her and Deputy Travis Shaw, who had filed the charge. She sat down without a word, hands folded like she'd done this before. On paper, the charge seemed simple enough: obstruction of justice. In reality, it was a mess. 2 weeks ago, there was an incident in a low-income housing complex. Police came in hard, no warrant, no warning. A young black teenager was slammed against a patrol car. Monica stepped in, told the officer to stop. Witnesses said she never raised her voice, never touched anyone. But the officer on record said she interfered. The department backed him. The prosecutor filed the charge. And now Monica sat there publicly branded as the kind of woman who makes trouble for the law. Her court-appointed attorney, Jamal Fisher, looked barely 30. Nervous energy clung to him. This was a man still trying to earn his seat at the table, and right now he was seated next to someone who wouldn't speak. Monica hadn't said much to him beyond the necessary. She answered his questions in clipped, respectful tones. She hadn't asked for a new lawyer. She hadn't requested a delay. She hadn't asked for anything. Across the aisle, Assistant District Attorney Lauren Price rose with the confidence of someone who didn't expect to lose. Blonde, sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed. Her voice was smooth as she began the opening statement, measured, intentional. She didn't just describe the incident. She colored it. She painted Monica as volatile, emotionally reactive, verbally combative. She made no overtly racist remarks, but every word was crafted to trigger the mental image people already had in their minds. The difficult black woman, the angry protester, the threat wrapped in silence. Monica sat motionless. People in the courtroom leaned forward. Some of them nodded subtly as Price spoke. Some crossed their arms. A few exchanged looks, the kind that said, "We know the type." But Monica didn't flinch. She didn't frown. She didn't even blink when Price implied she had a pattern of behavior, though she didn't elaborate on what that pattern was. Monica simply looked at the judge, then at no one. That was what unsettled the room most. No outburst, no outrage, no fire. Just a woman who seemed to be watching everything with the patience of someone measuring every inch of the floor beneath her feet. Every now and then she would write something in the corner of a folded page. No one could see what it said. Jamal finally stood to speak. His voice cracked once, then steadied. He defended her politely, respectfully argued that stepping forward to ask an officer what was happening didn't warrant a criminal charge. He referenced the First Amendment. He quoted from police policy, but he didn't have presence. Not yet. And it showed. Judge Franklin Harlow, who had been listening in silence, barely nodded when Jamal finished. He was an older man, gray at the temples, with a face carved from disapproval. He tapped his fingers once before turning back to the ADA. No one addressed Monica directly. She wasn't just the defendant, she was the mirror. A few people in the gallery whispered. They weren't whispering about the facts. They were whispering about her, wondering who she really was, why she wasn't speaking, why she looked unconcerned. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't defiance. It was something harder to name, something like knowing. And in that quiet, calculated stillness, a question began to form, not on paper, not in argument, but in the minds of those watching. Who is she really? And why does it feel like this woman is here for something much bigger than clearing her name? Deputy Travis Shaw took the stand, like a man stepping into his living room, relaxed, confident, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. The room seemed to shift around him. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't uncertain. He was here to perform, and everyone knew the script. He leaned into the microphone and called it a routine field encounter. Claimed Monica had escalated things without reason. Said she stepped between him and a suspect, obstructed his orders, refused to comply. He used words like threatening posture, unpredictable, and interfered with a lawful arrest. His tone was just right, firm, but not aggressive. Just believable enough for people to fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. Ada. Lauren Price didn't interrupt him once. In fact, she encouraged the rhythm, nodding occasionally, then stepping in to reframe every statement like a painter, adding just enough shadow to make the figure darker. She didn't have to say Monica was dangerous. She let the words hover, agitated, combative, disruptive, so the jury could make the leap themselves. Judge Harlow said little during the testimony, but the way he listened made things clear. He didn't challenge the inconsistencies, didn't ask why no body cam footage had been provided or why no other officer could corroborate Travis's claims. When Jamal tried to raise a question about evidence access, the judge cut him off, said they'd circle back. They didn't. You could feel it in the room. The balance was off. Jamal stood hesitant, trying to redirect. He pointed out that no official report had documented Monica raising her voice or making contact. He referenced civilian phone videos not admitted into evidence. He attempted to read aloud from a public complaint against Travis Shaw, but Judge Harlow immediately shut him down. That's not relevant to this hearing, the judge said, eyes narrowing. Jamal tried again. Your Honor. It speaks directly to, I said it's not relevant. That was the tone of finality. Jamal backed off, hands trembling just slightly as he folded his notes. Monica didn't flinch. She hadn't moved since the testimony began. Her face was still, her breath steady. Even when Travis mentioned her aggressive stance and refusal to comply with lawful orders, she didn't blink. No outrage, no rebuttal. She listened intently, but without expression. That silence unsettled people more than a protest ever could. Ada Price picked up where Travis left off. Her voice softened, strangely persuasive. She talked about community unrest, about how figures who defy order can inspire chaos, about how law enforcement depends on respect for boundaries. It was all said with professional polish, but everyone knew who she was talking about. Monica wasn't just on trial for her actions, she was being cast as a symbol, a warning. Monica's head tilted ever so slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but I saw it. It wasn't confusion, it was patience. Someone behind me whispered, "Why isn't she saying anything?" I didn't turn to answer, but I heard myself thinking it too. Because she was waiting. Because she didn't come here to fight their version of the story. She came to let them tell it in full. The tension grew heavier with each pause. Each time the judge interrupted Jamal, each time a point was dismissed, each time a truth was bent just enough to feel comfortable in the mouths of those who held the power. And then came a moment. Price closed her statement by calling Monica's behavior symptomatic of a deeper resistance to lawful authority. She glanced at Monica and added, "And that resistance, if left unchecked, sends the wrong message." That was when Monica finally lifted her eyes just for a moment and met Price's gaze. No hate, no fear, only calculation. And right then, someone, an older black man seated 3 rows back, murmured under his breath, just loud enough for the people around him to hear. "She's not here to defend, she's here to observe." I don't know if Price heard it. I'm not sure she would have understood it if she had, but Monica did. She folded her hands again, sat back, and watched the room keep digging its own grave. The recess was called like a formality, but no one moved as if it mattered. The air in that courtroom had thickened, weighted by something unsaid, something pressing on everyone's skin. When Monica stood up still in handcuffs, the chains didn't clink. It was her stillness that made people notice. She turned toward the bailiff and said one quiet word, "Restroom." Judge Harlow didn't lift his eyes, just gestured to Deputy Travis Shaw like this was routine. Like handing her off to the man accusing her was the most natural thing in the world. Travis walked up slowly, too slowly. He didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He grabbed her arm like she belonged to him. And so they walked, not down some private corridor, not behind closed doors. They walked through the courtroom past rows of people watching with tight jaws and folded arms. Some already convinced she was guilty, some still unsure what they were watching. But it happened right there in the middle of the room. No noise, no warning, just Monica turning her head slightly and saying it like a thought more than a challenge. I thought the badge was for protection. Travis didn't wait for the next step. He shoved her. Hard. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't a slip. It was a deliberate, open-palmed push, sharp and fast, right into the frame of the courtroom door. Her shoulder struck the molding with a thud that echoed across the floor, and for a split second, just a fraction, she bent. Not from pain, but from the shock of impact. And then she straightened, slow, controlled, without looking at him, without even touching the spot where she hit. The room froze. People turned. No one breathed. Someone in the back whispered, "Did he just?" and then stopped, because the look on Monica's face was unlike anything we'd seen all day. She looked forward, then at no one, then back at him, and in that stare there wasn't outrage. There wasn't fear. There was calculation so cold and focused it made you shift in your seat without knowing why. Travis didn't apologize, didn't flinch, just walked 2 steps ahead pretending it hadn't happened. But his ears were red and that told you everything. Ada Price looked up from her folder. She blinked once, then looked down again. Judge Harlow sat like a statue. He saw. We all did. But no gavel came down, no words were said. The law was silent. When Monica returned minutes later and re-entered that courtroom, she walked slower than before. Not because she was injured, but because she was watching now. Everyone, every face, every shift of body language. She sat down like nothing had happened, but something had. And the silence she brought back with her, it was no longer the silence of someone holding back. It was the silence of someone who knew. And the people in that courtroom, they started to know it too. Not all at once, not in words, but in posture. In eyes that wouldn't meet hers, in the way no one dared speak of what they just saw. And still Monica said nothing, because this wasn't just about what happened in that room. It was about who had just watched it happen, and chosen to stay quiet. It didn't take long after the break for the courtroom to turn sharp again. As soon as Monica sat down, Ada Lauren Price stood with a kind of rehearsed ease, like this was the part she'd been waiting for. The moment where the past could be twisted just enough to fit the present. She began by painting Monica as a recurring figure in internal affairs. She didn't say troublemaker. She didn't have to. Instead, she slid a printed report onto the evidence table and began to speak clearly, calmly, like someone gently pulling the curtain back to show something shameful. Ms. Reed, she said, her voice deliberate, has a history of filing misconduct claims against officers in multiple departments. None of those claims ever resulted in disciplinary action. All were dismissed for lack of corroboration or sufficient evidence. She let the words settle like seeds she knew would root fast in the minds of everyone listening. Then came the next blow. In 2017, she was removed from consideration for a senior position in the Richmond district. Internal reviewers cited concerns about difficult team dynamics and noted her resistance to supervisory input. There it was. That careful, polished way of saying what everyone was now invited to believe. Monica didn't just stand up to power. She couldn't work with it. And in that courtroom full of people who wanted the trial to be simple, those phrases sounded like more than background. They sounded like character. Monica sat still. She didn't shake her head. She didn't lean toward Jamal. She didn't even blink when her name was listed alongside words like problematic, non-collaborative, and consistently oppositional. Words that had no context, no nuance, just a tone meant to raise eyebrows. Jamal rose slowly, and for the first time he looked unsure. He tried, he really did. He reminded the court that none of those past cases were criminal in nature, that anyone has the right to report misconduct, that whistleblowers often face retaliation in the form of professional isolation. But his voice didn't carry, not because it was weak, but because Price had already done what she came to do. She had seeded doubt. Not just in the judge or the record, but in the people watching. She had wrapped Monica's silence in suspicion, wrapped her history in the suggestion of instability. She had made the jury and the gallery lean back just a little and ask themselves the question she never had to say out loud. What if this is just who she is? Jamal stumbled over a phrase, caught himself, and tried to pivot something about context, something about records not telling the full story. But it didn't land. He looked to Monica for help, for confirmation, for something. She didn't give it. Instead, she reached down calmly and pulled out a folded sheet of paper from the inside of her case file. She opened it flat, picked up a pen, and began writing methodically like someone filling out a form. Not rushing, not performing. The movement caught the eye of the young clerk sitting off to the side. Hannah. She leaned forward, slightly curious, and that's when she saw it. The header. A gold-embossed seal at the top of the page, one that didn't belong to the county court or the public defender's office. It belonged to the governor's office of internal oversight. Hannah didn't say a word. She just leaned back, lips pressed together, hands folded in her lap, eyes wide. She had seen something. She didn't know what it meant, not yet. But she knew it changed everything. Monica finished writing, folded the paper again, and set it aside like it meant nothing. Then she looked up and said, without looking at anyone in particular, "Justice isn't about how loud you scream. It's about how long you endure." The words floated not like an outburst, but like a verdict. And the room went still again, because even those who had started to doubt her now didn't know what to think anymore. It started with a glance, one of those instinctive, almost meaningless second looks that in a courtroom can change everything. Hannah had been moving quietly all morning, just as she had every other day. She handled exhibits, carried files, made sure everyone had water, and that the printer didn't jam mid-proceeding. No one really noticed her, just a young court clerk in her mid-20s with neat handwriting and a tendency to stay in the background. But something about that seal on Monica's paper wouldn't let her mind rest. During a lull in testimony, one of those long stretches where lawyers bicker over admissibility, Hannah opened the internal access terminal. She wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Maybe a case file. Maybe a records match. She typed in Monica's name. Nothing came up under standard personnel. She paused, thought for a second, then pulled access to restricted internal appointments. Her fingers hovered. She'd never used that clearance without instruction before, but something told her this wasn't ordinary. And there it was. Monica E. Reed, appointed by Governor's Office under Article 7, Section 421B, Special Investigative Oversight, Active Confidential Assignment. Status operational. Identity protected during active field inquiry. Hannah's breath caught. She leaned back slowly. Not out of shock, out of fear that she'd seen something she shouldn't have. The words weren't loud, but their meaning echoed like a bell. This woman, this defendant, wasn't just another citizen caught up in a flawed arrest. She was sent here. By them. Hannah didn't know what to do with that. Her palms were suddenly clammy, and the courtroom felt smaller somehow, like the walls had shifted closer. She waited, then stood slowly approaching the defense table during a short recess. Jamal was flipping through his notes, scribbling something underlined 3 times. His brow was furrowed. He didn't look up until she tapped the table. "Can I talk to you?" Hannah whispered. Jamal blinked. "Now, it's about your client." She pulled him aside, barely 6 feet from where Monica still sat, hands folded, eyes closed, as if meditating while the room boiled around her. "I saw something," Hannah murmured, voice barely audible. "In the system. I don't think she's who you think she is." Jamal froze. He studied her face, half expecting a prank, a misunderstanding. But there was no mischief in her expression. Only a quiet, honest kind of fear. He nodded once, and when he turned back toward the table, the air around him had changed. The page in front of him blurred for a second, then refocused. He stared at Monica. He wasn't angry. He was lost. The judge returned, and so did the structure of formality. Everyone rose. Everyone sat. And then came the moment the room didn't expect. Ada Price stood and made a formal offer. Reduced charges, community service, no jail time. Monica didn't hesitate. She stood, not rushed, not defensive, and looked Price in the eye. "I'm not here to negotiate," she said. Her voice was calm, steady. "I'm here to witness." That one sentence cracked through the courtroom like thunder in a dry canyon, and for the first time, even the jury seemed unsure of what they were seeing. The woman they had been told was disruptive, aggressive, problematic wasn't defending herself. She wasn't arguing or pleading. She was watching. Price blinked. "You'd rather take the risk of full conviction. I'd rather let the system reveal itself." A pause. "You've already done the work." Judge Harlow shifted in his seat. For the first time, his fingers paused mid-page. He glanced toward Price, then toward Travis Shaw, who stiffened under the weight of the silence. Something unspoken passed through the room. It wasn't just doubt anymore. It was fear. People looked at Monica differently now, less like a suspect and more like a mirror. And no one in power likes to see their own reflection when the mask starts to slip. She sat back down. still handcuffed, still calm, but the tension in the room had turned. Not against her, against itself. It was just past noon when the back doors of the courtroom opened, not with noise, but with presence. A quiet hush fell across the gallery as heads turned unsure whether they were reacting to the man or the silence that seemed to walk in with him. He didn't wear his uniform, no medals, no stars, just a dark suit pressed with the kind of quiet dignity that doesn't demand attention but commands it. Chief Eric Reed stepped forward one pace at a time as if he already knew every eye in that room would be fixed on him before he even spoke. Judge Harlow barely looked up. "Sir, this is not a public hearing for statements. I won't be long," Eric said, voice low, resonant, and still walking. "I'm asking you to step back." The judge repeated more sternly now. "This is not your courtroom." Eric stopped at the railing. "No," he said softly. "It's hers." The silence that followed didn't feel like stillness. It felt like reckoning. Eric's gaze didn't shift toward the judge. It didn't move toward Jamal or toward the gallery of strangers watching. He looked directly at Travis Shaw. "That woman you shoved," he said, not raising his voice but making every syllable count. "The one you lied about. The one you tried to humiliate in front of all these people." His pause wasn't for drama. It was for memory. "She's my wife." Gasps broke through the back row before anyone could stop them. A woman in the third row actually stood stunned, as if she hadn't heard correctly. But Eric's eyes didn't leave Travis's face. And Travis, he didn't blink. His lips parted like he wanted to deny it. Say it wasn't true. Say this had to be some kind of trick, but his jaw stayed frozen, the color draining from his face. "Ada." Price went rigid. Not a word, not a breath. Just a flicker of something in her throat like she had just swallowed glass. Monica did not flinch. She hadn't looked at Eric once during his approach, hadn't smiled, hadn't shifted even slightly, but now slowly she stood. And when she did, it wasn't with anger or vengeance. It was like she had been waiting for the mask to drop. She turned not to the gallery, not to the jury, but to Ada Price. "You knew the law," Monica said quietly. She didn't raise her voice, didn't point a finger, didn't dramatize the moment. "But you didn't think it applied to me." Price didn't answer. Couldn't. Her eyes narrowed, then softened, then darted downward, searching for a page, a rule, a technicality, anything to pull the attention off what was unraveling in real time. But the air had already shifted. People were no longer watching a defendant. They were watching the system confront itself. Jamal, standing now beside Monica, looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. His notes slipped through his fingers and onto the desk without him noticing. There was no script for this. He had walked into this courtroom thinking he was defending a woman against a bad arrest. Now he understood. He was standing beside someone who hadn't come to defend herself. She had come to reveal the very people trying to convict her. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "You're investigating all of them." Monica turned to him, not cold, not unkind, but with a calm that told him he'd just caught up to where she had been all along. "I never needed protection," she said. Just that. And in the back row, a man stood up. Someone in a gray suit who hadn't spoken all day. He whispered something to the person next to him, then left the room with urgency in his steps. No one stopped him, but many noticed. The atmosphere was no longer legal. It was political and personal. Judge Harlow tried to regain control, banging the gavel once, but it sounded hollow now, like a man shouting at the tide. The illusion had cracked, and all because one man had walked into the room and reminded them all this woman wasn't alone. She never was. And now the courtroom wasn't just watching a trial. It was watching a reckoning begin. The courtroom felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. After Eric's revelation, no one quite knew how to sit, how to speak, how to even blink, without second-guessing what would come next. The judge, stiff in his seat, was no longer in control. Ada Price hadn't spoken since, and Travis Shaw looked like someone who'd been pushed into open water and told to swim without knowing how deep it ran. And Monica. She was exactly where she had planned to be. She didn't ask to speak. She didn't raise her hand or wait for permission. She just stepped forward, turned to Jamal, and said quietly, "It's time." Jamal hesitated. "Are you sure?" Monica gave him a look, steady assured, and nodded once. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a thin black drive, and handed it to Hannah, the clerk. She glanced at it, confused. "It's internal footage," Jamal said, projecting his voice, now more confident than he had been all trial. Time-stamped, authenticated, audio and video. Judge Harlow narrowed his eyes. From where? From inside the department building, from a restricted hallway outside the evidence integrity room, 48 hours before my client's arrest. Price sat straighter, a flicker of something behind her eyes. Hannah approached the screen monitor set up in the corner. She hesitated. "Your Honor, objection," Price said sharply. "We haven't verified the source. This wasn't filed in pretrial discovery." Jamal didn't flinch, because it didn't exist in our hands then. It was secured through an independent oversight request after certain comments were made. "You're playing games with rules. I'm exposing how you've broken them." The judge was clearly losing ground but tried to salvage control. "Until this is verified, this is not admissible," but Hannah had already inserted the drive. The screen lit up. At first, nothing but a still hallway, gray walls, quiet. Then two figures entered the frame. Travis Shaw and Lauren Price. No uniforms, no folders, just voices. The audio clicked on clean sharp. Travis's voice. "She's pushing too close. You heard what she did in Westlake. It's gonna come up." Price's voice. "Then we shut her down before she speaks. Loud ones like her only need a little public dirt to fold." Travis. "She's just another mouth. They all think they're brave until the charges hit." Price laughed a short, bitter exhale. Price let her scream. No one listens to women like her, especially not black women. The audio cut. You could hear the air change in the room. Price's hand shot out. "That footage is doctored," but Hannah stepped forward. Her voice didn't tremble. "No, ma'am, it's authentic. I've checked the file signatures myself. Timestamps, metadata, everything aligns." Judge Harlow's mouth moved, but no words came out. Then Monica spoke. Calm, clear, not angry, measured. "I didn't come here to scream. I didn't come to protest. I came because something inside this courthouse reeked. And now I don't need to prove that it does." She turned toward the jury, toward the gallery, toward the cameras that had begun flashing through the glass at the back of the room. "You've proven it yourselves." No one could look away. Not from Monica, not from the screen behind her, not even from the trembling silence of the people once so sure of their positions. And then came the sentence that ended the courtroom's illusion. "I was sent here because we suspected corruption," she said. "You didn't fail me. You exposed yourselves." Every syllable hit like a drumbeat. Outside the courtroom, the sound of doors opening, feet rushing, voices rising. The press had arrived. They had their story. But more than that, Monica had done what she came to do. The truth wasn't just spoken. It had been caught on tape, and now the people who had silenced so many for so long were the ones being recorded and watched. No one remembered anymore what the original charge against Monica Reed had been. It was somewhere in the paperwork still sitting on the judge's bench. Obstruction, they'd called it. But that word meant nothing now. Not after the footage, not after the silence that followed it. And certainly not after Monica turned slow and deliberate to face the courtroom once more, this time not as a defendant, but as the only one truly in control. She didn't ask to be heard. She just began to speak. In the last 3 years, 78% of reported police brutality cases involving black residents in Kingswood were dismissed before reaching full review. She let the number hang like a smoke alarm nobody wanted to acknowledge. No charges, no investigations, no follow-ups, just forms, quietly closed. She looked toward this prosecution table, and of those, 11 cases were personally recommended for dismissal by the ADA sitting in this room today. Price shifted in her seat, but not to object. There was nothing left to object with. Monica stepped forward. Her feet didn't shake, her voice didn't crack. "We talk about justice as if it belongs to the loudest, the richest, the most educated in the room. But justice is supposed to belong to the ones who don't get to speak, who don't know the rules, who show up and are already behind." She held up a page, not for show, just enough so the judge could see. "This is a memo," she said. An internal email stamped with Judge Harlow's initials. It outlines strategies for navigating public accountability, including how to word dismissals in misconduct cases to avoid public inquiry. Judge Harlow shifted his hand, twitching toward the gavel again, but this time he didn't raise it. He knew the sound would be hollow. Monica didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. And yet I'm the one who was put on trial. That's when Eric stood. He hadn't spoken since the moment he revealed who Monica really was, but now he didn't look like a husband defending a wife. He looked like a man defending truth. They didn't just underestimate her, Eric said, his voice cutting clean through the tension. They underestimated what the system still owes us. The gallery was still, not out of shock anymore, but out of something heavier. Recognition. Jamal stood now too, not out of duty but solidarity. He looked toward the jury box, then to the rows behind him, as if searching for any sign that this wasn't just theater. But no one moved, because they all knew this wasn't a performance. This was the shift. This was the room turning from trial chamber into reckoning. Then Monica spoke again, but not to accuse, not to demand. She spoke with a kind of grace that disarmed even those who had just days ago been ready to label her a threat. "I'm not here to ask for retribution," she said, "not even for myself." She looked at Price, looked at Harlow, looked at Travis Shaw. "I don't want indictments. I want change. I want policies that can't be rewritten in whispers. I want reviews that don't rely on favors. I want a system that remembers justice doesn't wear a uniform or sit behind a podium. It listens. And it learns." There was nothing else to say after that, nothing that wouldn't sound like an excuse, nothing that could quiet what had just been exposed. And for the first time since Monica walked into that courtroom in chains, the people who put her there knew they were the ones being judged now. The trial didn't end with a verdict. It ended with silence, one that was louder than any gavel. The next morning, headlines screamed what the courtroom hadn't yet officially declared. But it was already too late for those trying to hold on to power. Deputy Travis Shaw was stripped of duty within hours. An internal investigation was opened, not quietly, not behind closed doors. His name appeared on every screen in Kingswood not as an enforcer of law, but as a warning of what happens when arrogance walks unchecked. Ada. Lauren Price didn't speak to the press. She didn't show up to her office the next day either. By noon, a public statement from the DA's office confirmed she'd been reassigned pending a formal ethics review. And as for Judge Harlow, he didn't return to the bench. A notice appeared on the courthouse door framed in bureaucracy. Administrative leave pending oversight findings. But everyone already knew what it meant. His silence had screamed too loudly, and now that silence had cost him his seat. Yet Monica never celebrated. She stood on the courthouse steps with Jamal beside her and Eric just behind, not as symbols of victory, but as reminders that the work wasn't over. When a reporter shouted, "Do you feel justice was served?" she didn't smile. She just answered plainly, gently, "Accountability isn't punishment. It's the first step to healing." That was all. And it landed harder than any sentence could. Jamal, the young public defender who once fumbled his notes and questioned his own role, was now being approached by city reform groups, education panels, and oversight committees. They wanted him not as a lawyer, but as a voice, a new generation, a bridge between what had failed and what could be built. "I'm not sure I'm ready," he told Monica quietly that afternoon. "You weren't supposed to be," she replied. "You were supposed to care enough to grow into it. No confetti, no shouting crowds, just ripples." But those ripples reached. Across Kingswood, officers signed up for new bias training programs, mandatory ones, not symbolic. Residents who once never stepped near City Hall began attending council meetings, and in coffee shops, churches, and late-night porches, people started asking better questions. The courtroom lights dimmed, the file was closed, but no one forgot how it felt when the system finally looked back at itself and blinked. The courthouse doors creaked open, not with ceremony but with weight. Cameras clicked like a ticking clock. Reporters surged microphones, trembling to catch the first word. But Monica Reed didn't stop. She didn't raise a hand. She didn't look for the spotlight. She just walked. Beside her, Eric matched her stride. Not guarding her, not leading, just there as he always had been in the silence. The crowd parted, confused by her refusal to perform. They wanted a statement, a speech, some triumphant declaration of justice. But Monica had already said everything she needed to, just not in the way they expected. Near the edge of the crowd, a little black girl clutched her mother's hand, staring at Monica like she was a living monument. Her voice was barely louder than the rustle of leaves on the courthouse steps. She didn't yell. The mother bent down her gaze soft. She didn't need to. And somehow that answer felt bigger than any headline. Jamal watched from the top step, not as her lawyer anymore, but as someone changed. He wasn't sure what kind of lawyer he'd be after this. He only knew he'd never be the same. Behind him, Hannah stood still, her court papers pressed to her chest like something sacred. She leaned in, whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the moment itself. Maybe justice doesn't shout. Maybe it just walks quietly and leaves a mark. And in the stillness, Monica finally spoke, not to the press, not to the city, not even to the crowd trailing her path. She just exhaled. The kind of breath you take when a weight has been carried long enough to reshape your back, your voice, your purpose. Some days, she said, barely above the breeze, silence is the loudest sound in the room. Then she kept walking, and no one could forget her silence ever again. Thank you for staying with us through Monica Reed's story. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just about one woman. It was about what happens when silence becomes a form of resistance, when quiet strength exposes loud injustice, and when someone stands not to fight back, but to hold a mirror to the system itself. Monica didn't win by yelling. She won by enduring. And sometimes that's the kind of courage that truly leaves a mark. If this story moved, you don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who still believes justice matters, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, real-life inspired tales just like this one. Your support means everything. It gives our team the strength to keep uncovering stories that challenge, inspire, and stay with you long after they end. And next time you hear silence in a room, listen closer. It just might be where justice begins. It